Like to remind council once more to refrain from asking questions until staff's presentations are completed. So council will receive an update on the fire triggers and thresholds, fire service currently provided in the high growth areas of Goodyear, and available resources for the new fire station construction. Fire Chief Paul Louisi and Finance Director Larry Lane will be presenting. Gentlemen.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight, as you well said, we're going to talk about triggers and thresholds, fire service delivery, and looking at fire service in our growth areas. We'll also look at current CIP funding, which Larry will go over with you, recommended next steps, and then allow for any questions or discussions you may have. So before we touch on those growth areas, I'd like to talk to you about what we did with the triggers and thresholds back in 2014. So these are the triggers and thresholds that I brought to you in 2014. Previously, we had some triggers and thresholds that were developed in the 2008 Sonoran Valley Public Safety Master Plan. And certainly that was a different time than it is today or was in 2014. And so these were made in an attempt to spawn a discussion or conversation about what is best for the way that we're growing in our city. And so I had proposed these triggers and thresholds. And again, it was done during a work session, so there was no formal adoption by council. So currently, the only thing that we've adopted formally by council would be the 2008 Sonoran Valley Public Safety Master Plan. But again, these were brought to you, and I'll review those quickly with you. Total response time is greater than 8 minutes, 30% of the time. And the proposed residential development is greater than 6 miles away from the current station, and 500 calls for service annually in that new area. Now again, these were brought to you, and one of the things that I took away from the meeting that night was that we didn't have to hit all 3 of the triggers in order to come back. But if we were starting to approach on some, that council would certainly want to have another conversation with us. And so really here we are today kind of talking about those growth areas. And I know there's some concern about, how these were developed, that they don't certainly meet a lot of the criteria that's out there through the other organizations. And one of the questions that came up was about the response times that were greater than 8 minutes, 30% of the time. And this was actually derived from the Sonoran Valley Public Safety Master Plan that said the development is 3 to 4 miles away and 20 to 25% of the response time is greater than 8 minutes. So kind of an offshoot of that trigger, again, that was proposed in 2008. So just kind of a little bit of history on how we got to these triggers and thresholds. Now I want to talk about the 2 areas in the city that are experiencing the most significant growth and how they compare to those standards that we talked about in 2014. So we're going to look at the Estrella area, West Goodyear, and then we'll talk about recommendations and have questions and discussion after that. So the Estrella area is south of the Gilas, and it's highlighted by that nice yellow star that we have there. And you can see where Fire Station 182 is in the middle picture, and then where the proposed Fire Station 186 would be with the yellow small star at the bottom of the middle picture. The area that we're talking about for the growth perspective is south of Ray Road, and that's the dotted blue line, so it would be south of the Ray Road alignment. So in the mid-1990s, the fire department began providing fire and emergency services to the Estrella and served the community from a temporary awning that was placed on the Fire 182 site with a single engine that was manned by volunteers. And then to better meet the demand for the service in that area, in 2002 and 2003, a permanent station was constructed, and as it sits right now at Estrella and Spring Drive. Call volume for Fire Station 182 is 756 incidents in calendar year 2015. And they had an average response time of 6 minutes and 42 seconds to the calls in that area that they responded to. So then we'll look at the Ray Road alignment being south of the Ray Road alignment. Those calls had an average response time of 8 minutes and 19 seconds. And 58% of those calls were greater than 8 minutes. The area is 4 miles to 5.1 miles from the current station, 182. Right now, we're seeing about 147 calls annually. And this has increased pretty significantly, about 34% from calendar year 2014 to 2015. And then if you look back on an average over the last 5 years, on an annual basis, it's been increasing about 24%. So currently with the triggers that we talked about in 2014, it's only met one trigger, and that's the response time trigger of the 8 minutes. And if you look at a call breakdown, fire versus EMS calls, about 58% of the calls in south of the Ray Road alignment are for EMS, the balance being for fire-related calls. Also in that area, we have automatic aid assistance from Buckeye Valley Fire Station 326. And they responded to 24 calls south of the Ray Road alignment, and they respond from Arlington Road and Rainbow Valley Road. Their response time to that area is 9 minutes and 58 seconds. On average, they're traveling about 5.3 to 5.6 miles down to the Cantamia area or the Montecito villages. And that 24 actually is included in the total number that I gave you on the previous slide of 147. And then we'll look at West Goodyear. And the way that we define West Goodyear to look at calls is to the north is I-10, to the west is Perryville, to the east is Cotton, and then for a while we were looking at calls no further south than Yuma. But after talking with the crews at Fire Station 184, they said there's a lot of calls that are happening south of Yuma. So we actually went all the way down to West Broadway to pick up those calls that Fire Station 184 was responding to. So not our typical response polygon response area that we would watch as a hotspot, but certainly something that we wanted to reflect all of the calls that they would be going to. So they travel from 184, which is at Saraville in Yuma, roughly, and they go out to this area. It takes them about 6 minutes and 53 seconds on average. About 13% of the calls are greater than 8 minutes right now. The area is between 2 miles and 4.9 miles from the current station. In last year, in calendar year 2015, there's 386 calls that happened. Now, this is a 43% increase from the previous calendar year. Very similar to kind of what we're seeing in South Goodyear, but the rate is a little bit higher for us. If you looked at it over the last 5 years, about a 14% increase in rate of calls. The other thing I wanted to make sure we looked at as well is north of I-10 sits the prison, which produces calls for us as well. So I ran those numbers for 2015. There's about 163 calls in 2015. So about a call every other day. Certainly this station would be closest by proximity and would probably pick those calls up in addition. So you're adding another 163 calls onto that 386. Currently, because of where Fire Station 321 is for Buckeye Valley, they're picking up a majority of those calls right now. And based on the current triggers that we looked at in 2014, nothing would be met for the West Goodyear. So then we looked at, current call volumes for our stations for calendar year 2015. And as you can see, those numbers are up there for you to look at. Annual basis is on the second column. And then we broke it down by average calls per day. And then they have the average response time. So, for instance, Fire Station 181, which is at Yuma and Litchfield, it's just west of that intersection. 2,475 calls in calendar year. They do about 6.78 calls per day. And their average response time to those calls is 5 minutes and 28 seconds. And then obviously you can see that tracks down through all of our stations, 182, 183, 184, 185, and then Fire Station 187, which is down in Mobile. Okay, so next I'm going to have Larry talk about the station costs and the current CIP funding.
Okay, thank you, Paul. This slide, I admit, a little bit busy, has a lot of information on it. It's really here to kind of be a frame of reference as the conversations that we've had and for you to be able to discuss. The cost of a fire station is approximately $4.6 million. In addition, there are costs for apparatus, which a traditional fire station using $750,000. That isn't just the fire truck and apparatus. That would be FF&E also included in the building. So we've kind of lumped all of that together in that particular one. There would, if in the case of south of Ray Road, there would also be a battalion chief station in the long term, so there'd be another vehicle for that, and that's what that $92,000 is.
And we added that data set in there just to make sure that you were seeing that. We know that the 92 would be kind of the base number on that. We anticipate that number could be a little bit higher based upon additional equipment that be placed on that vehicle.
And what we're showing on this slide, I'm going to focus on the top numbers before the or first, and that's for filling the station the way completely. Okay, so the total one-time cost would be $5,350,000. The next column shows the total ongoing costs of $2.2 million. That number, I apologize for the confusion in this, but that number includes personnel, and it does include the ongoing O&M costs that are in the next column. Okay, so that $232,000 in the farthest column to the right does include the personnel costs, or is included in the one that says ongoing personnel costs. So the total operating on an annual basis, full station with a battalion chief, be $2.2 million. Or the second option would be a brush truck, two-person crew, the annual total cost personnel, and that would be about $700,000. That calculation, as a frame of reference, they use the Mobile service that we're providing today as that frame of reference for how that cost was obtained. And so that included the ongoing costs that are in Mobile that are nowhere near what's shown in that far right-hand column. The second station down is a more traditional station that does not have a battalion chief in it, and you can see that the ongoing operating cost is where the real difference is, and that's $1.8 million per year to operate it. For a two-person station, that would be about $700,000. And then the final item that we're showing here is $940,000 for a temporary station, smaller station just to house a brush truck or something like that, a smaller crew. It would be temporary. You would still end up having eventually to build another station, so it wouldn't be your most cost-effective move from a capital standpoint. And you can see the ongoing operating cost wouldn't really change a whole lot. It would be on the capital. The capital improvement plan that we're showing here, fiscal year 22, the fire station at Harrison and Citrus would be funded first. This is in the adopted capital improvement plan. This is where it's been timed based on the funds coming in. That's been the entire basis for this particular funding arrangement. So you would see, based on our capital improvement plans, we would be bringing on two fire stations basically about a year apart. adding that operating expense at that point in time. That's simply with the impact fees as funded today, and I'm sure there'll be questions and more discussion as we get through to that part. And then finally, I wanted to let you know just what cash is available today. Where are we? And this actually is very hot off the press. This is through January 31st of 2016. We have remaining impact fee funds from the 2012 fee, in other words, prior to August 1st of 2014, of about $1.3 million. And those are restricted to capital, but they could go towards either or both of the stations. They're not as restricted. Then we have an impact fee that's been established for the north and central area since August 1st of 2014. Has about $400,000 in it, and that is for the station that will be located in West Goodyear. The south impact fee area has about $200,000 cash in there. We also received from a previous development agreement, we have received and still have remaining approximately $660,000 in cash that was provided by the developers and builders in that area and is still available, but that would have to, of course, go into the south of Ray Road station.
All right, so now we'll look at the recommended next steps. Right now, we'd like to recommend that we have a new fire station location study. This would cover the entire city, all of our geographic boundaries. And I think this would allow us to look at the city and how it's growing today. I think it would also allow us to develop new triggers and thresholds to make sure that that's meeting the needs of our city and the growth of our city. And also, it kind of strikes me that we need to look at, our current stations and are they positioned in the right place, or even the future stations. Are they positioned in the right place? So I think bringing in a subject matter expert to look at this program and really develop a solid foundation for the future will really kind of help our council and our city as we continue to grow. Currently, none of the growth areas that we highlighted tonight meet all three of the triggers. Certainly, there are some that are approaching that quickly. I think the West Goodyear is one that's starting to really creep up. This is something that Lisa Nagel and I continue to watch on a quarterly basis and see those numbers start to increase as we highlighted tonight. So again, we continue to watch and monitor those response areas and for any triggers as growth continues to occur. And we've built that now with development services, we've built that into some of the final plat discussions that come before you, kind of show you at least a response analysis of if something was built there, what would be the current response times to those areas. So we're continuing to try to provide as updated as information as we can to council when those types of questions come before you. So I guess at this point, we'd be open for any questions or discussions that you would like to have.
Thank you. I'm going to start with Joe Bazzillo.
Thanks, Chief. A couple questions. I'm still trying to get my hands around going out for another study where we place fire stations. And here's the reasons why. I thought under our, the recent plan that we just adopted, places fire stations on our general plan, doesn't it? Of where it doesn't? There's no plans in place where our current fire station should be located?
No, we talk about response times in the general plan, but specifically not where stations are located. That was in the Sonoran Valley Public Safety Master Plan.
So we have no plans right now in place that we've adopted that shows where fire stations should be located?
We do. From 2008, the Sonoran Valley Public Safety Master Plan is one for the entire city.
For the entire city?
Yep, for the entire city that shows where stations should go.
And I guess the reason why I have a hard time getting my hands around it, because to me what should drive it, at least in my mind, is the response times and what your triggers end up having to be. And the reason being is we're not sure where, you're going to do a study today, and 2 years from now, the whole growth pattern may change depending on who comes in, what permits are pulled and what area becomes hot. So I'm not sure the study right now, putting and paying for a contractor to develop where that's going to be right now is, at least in my view, and again, I'm not the expert on this, is more valuable than trying to determine what the triggers will be. Because depending on where those triggers are and what grows in what areas, that may drive where those particular fire stations are going to end up. And if we do a study right now, assuming that it's going to be over here, and then say, for example, a year later, it gets a hot spot somewhere else in the city, the whole synopsis changes.
Correct.
So that's why I'm still kind of getting my hands around paying money to do another study, at this point. Second thing is I looked at the West, and you have 386 calls,
Yes.
and it's growing at 30-some%.
Yep.
So it seems to me about in 2 years, almost meet that threshold, at least the 500 calls, don't you?
Oh, I agree. I mean, this is, like I said, this is something that we watch on a quarterly basis. We are consulting a lot with the crews because they're certainly responding to those calls out there. So we want to make sure that we're not missing any areas. And just, blindly, as you can do an analysis on a computer, we want to make sure that we're up to date. We're talking with the crews. And that it's actually 43% growth out in that area. But yeah, we're concerned about that.
And that's what kind of jumped out at me, even before we talk about, up the hill in Australia, is you got the west side, or at least West Goodyear with the 386. Seems we're going to be getting there in a year or two from now,
Yeah.
where the demand is going to be there. As far as some of the development agreements we have out there, and I know I'm sure staff is working with some of our developers to ensure that those development agreements, I would like to see us continue working to try to hone those numbers down to ensure what revenue sources we may have to offset some of these. Because with that 1.8 and that 2.2 million, at least from my sneak preview we got last week on our revenue growth, it doesn't look real promising to do a whole lot of things. So I would like staff to continue working with our developers and in partnership to arrive at some type of an agreement to help offset some of these costs, in some of our outer growth period. Because again, some of those numbers I've seen just don't seem to come to merit it. But again, if you can help me get my hands around another study, I still think triggers as a result, getting our triggers and get baseline setups on a nationwide or something that's recognized out there, to me is more important. And with the expertise we have in hand and with the GPS that you have in locating where all those calls are, again, in my view, that's more valuable than right now trying to plug where all those are going to be, because that may change a year or two from now. And again, I'm not the expert, but that's in my view, that's how I'm kind of envisioning another study at this point, because it may change. The triggers are more important where the density is coming in.
Okay.
That's it.
Wally?
I just have a question, Chief, about
Yes, ma'am.
your presentation. Did we get that?
Yes, ma'am.
We did?
Yeah, it was uploaded on.
Because I printed out all
Thursday.
of this stuff, and I don't have all your numbers, and I want those numbers.
Which numbers are those,
The
ma'am?
numbers where you had the actual call volume.
I can go back to those if you'd like.
No, I want it. I'll get it in my hand.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I can get
I'd
those
like
to
you
you.
to email it to me. Because, yeah, it's not here. It's not here. So how could it be? Yeah, why is it different from what we have?
On the staff report.
All right, all right. Well, I was going to go by this one because this is the only one I really studied, your triggers and thresholds.
Yes.
I noticed that the triggers and thresholds that we are currently using, well, maybe we're not using them. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe we haven't determined the exact threshold that we want to use.
Yeah,
That's the issue.
those were recommendations that were provided to you, and we in the fire department have been using those as we kind of move forward with the growth that we're starting to see in the city.
Right. Okay. But I did study the Sonoran Master Plan, and I don't know where they came from, those thresholds, from those response times. Some of it did not make any sense to me because at that time it was booming. Everything
Yeah.
was being built, and we assumed we would have houses on every corner, so therefore we would need all these additional fire stations. And I have a real hard time trying to figure out how we're going to provide this service. We can't have a fire station 2 miles from every development. It's just not feasible. So we just have to figure out where to place our fire stations where we can utilize the best for everyone. Even though we do have automatic aid, I understand that. But our first call, our first service is to this city.
Absolutely.
And this city is the most important to me than any other city when it's our own fire personnel. So
Right.
we just want to be sure we're covering our city as best as we can.
Right, and that's why we're hoping that that study would help, enlighten us a little more on, how best to place the stations, where to place the stations, the appropriate response times and triggers.
Yeah, well, I'm in favor of a study because I feel this one is not feasible for us to use as a document for us to move forward. That's just my personal opinion. But I do understand where you're coming from, Joe. I really do. Because growth should pay for growth, and we should have our services where the growth is. And we really don't know where all this growth is coming from. We just, and our fire crews now are, I would say 90 to 95% of their calls are all medical. And so, that time is of the essence because they are medical calls. So we have that on our, to be concerned about as well. So that's it. Thank you, Chief.
Joanne?
No, I was just going to say, I wasn't talking about growth paying for growth. I was more concerned that if you do a study and they're making some assumption growth is going to be here,
No,
and then
I
all of a
get it.
sudden
I
a year from
understand.
now,
Yeah.
it's over there, and then it changes the whole synopsis of where that fire station's going. That's why, to me, the triggers on the density and the distance and the time is more important than to try to pick a point in time and say, we're going to assume development's going to be like this, and then that's where the fire station, because it may change in a year or two depending on
You're
what
right.
area gets hot. That's my only thought.
But some of these calls may not be because the density is getting bigger. It's because they're the same calls that are going back to the same areas. Because we have some areas where we'll have hundreds of calls, but it's not necessarily more people. It's just the volume of the calls. So we have that to try to help mitigate, I guess. So, okay, thanks.
Joanne?
I can start. I mean, obviously, since I wasn't here on your last discussion, I may have some other questions you've already answered. So, Sherry, would you like, Sherilyn or Bill, would you like to go before me? I mean, I don't.
All right, we'll put her before you.
Okay, I want to thank you for coming back with some ideas because we've talked about this, and this obviously is a concern up in our community of Estrella because we are so remote. So that is very much an issue. I do like the idea of a study because again, I understand where you're coming from. We don't want to pinpoint it, but I think it is a very good idea because when that study was made, we were in high growth, very, very high growth, and it has slowed down and it has changed. And a couple of these areas were really just right on the borderline on some things. And it is kind of a concern for some of the people in the communities. And I think we need to go out to make sure we keep contact with our development partners so that we are all on the same page. I think that's been one problem we might have had in the past, that we all, with the high growth and the changes, we haven't always communicated with them. So I think that's really important that we make sure we do that. I would like to know, with this study, is this something we can include police and like a public safety study as well, if we're going to do a study? Because I know that's an issue that has changed as well.
Ryan?
Mayor and Vice Mayor, what the fire chief is recommending is obviously just for fire station locations. It was not anticipated to include police as well. That was covered back in the former study as well, but that goes back to 2008, so that is dated. If it's direction at council to include a look at police, we could certainly include it in there. We just have to look at the potential cost for that as well.
And I don't know if it's just a fire, if like whoever does these just only does fires. I don't know that. And then my other question is, can we look at this study? One of my concerns that we've talked about with Estrella is not just the fact of the call distance, but the redundancy under mutual aid. If we got the one truck that's gone, is that something we can ask them to look at? What kind of redundancies we can have built into our system?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, because you know what I'm saying.
Yes, yeah, answering that second call while the first call's out. Yeah.
Because I think the odds of them both being on mutual aid are probably a little lower.
Yeah.
And then could we also ask with regard to what's been brought up, and I don't know if I'm throwing stuff that the study can't do, you can just tell me thank you, but that's not going to work, is we've talked about both the paramedicine program and we've also talked possibly about an ambulance program if a lot of these calls are medical. How, if we're studying, can we just have this all figured out? Is this something they can do to say, well, the paramedicine's going to cut this many calls off so you don't need a fire station? I don't know.
We're certainly hopeful that the grant that we've submitted will produce some good data, if we do receive that. And if everything goes through, we got the study, that the grant information could tie right into that and potentially give us some information. Certainly, as you know, a feasibility study was done on the ambulance, and we would certainly allow the contractors that came in to do the fire study to look at that as well and make recommendations on that if that's what council chooses to do.
Okay, I would kind of like that, because if we are getting a lot of medical calls and they say, well, this might be a way to go, or to save money, that I don't know. I don't know what the calls specifically are, but I think the more information we get, if we're going to study it, let's study it once and kind of get a plan, because I do know that fire stations don't magically appear in 6 months, that we need to have some sort of plan in place as we grow. So I am for that. So I appreciate if we could include those type of things. And if they can't do it, that I understand, but I would like to at least try to include as much information as possible so we get our hands on it.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Joanne?
All right. Well, I'm going to be all over the place because I've written down so many questions, and then you brought, after going through this, I see a few more. So,
okay.
First of all, I'll just hit slightly on what both Sherry and Joe have already said, because Sherry, I did have the community paramedicine. We look at all of this call volume across the city, and I am curious as to how many are our frequent guests.
Yeah.
And where are they specifically? Is it back to it's not distance, but it's accumulated in an area? Where are they? And
yeah, actually one of the areas that's in West Goodyear, south of Yuma, it's kind of a hot point for our frequent users of the 911 system. So something that we're looking at when we worked with Health Service Advisor Group on the grant formulation, they just ran it by zip code, so our north zip code and our south zip code. So I didn't get down to the street level. But, we know through our electronic patient care reporting system how we can kind of narrow those numbers down and those addresses down to a certain area. Those would, my goal would be for those addresses to be visited by the community paramedics to make a proactive visit and hopefully stop some of the frequent use of the 911 system.
So I think that factoring that in does make a difference in certain areas. I can see that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Larry, just for memory, with the census, what is going to be our new ongoing revenue from that?
The assumption we made when we did the financial 5-year financial forecast was about a $1.5 million increase in state shared revenues
per year.
Per year, right?
Correct.
Annual.
Does that include, is that what our new 7?
That is the estimate we've used in our financial
But not the
forecasting.
new final
There's a
number that just
lot
came
of
in.
variables that we're going to try to tweak it a little bit, and hopefully in the next few weeks we'll have a more accurate number. But I think it gives us a good overall picture.
So the new number is 75,557.
75,577.
77.
So a number
We know
we
it's
just got
5s and
today.
7s, okay?
75577.
Seven's a lucky number. You never know. Okay. On average, obviously, when a call for service comes,
Yes.
what is the down? I don't want to say downtime, but what is that time for the unit taking up? Is there an average? Have you ever looked at what is the average? If you're go ahead.
Yeah, I think we're about 30 minutes,
30 minutes?
roughly. And you always want to add extra time into that. And nationally, they say about 16 minutes to provide for that restock, report writing, getting themselves back into service. So 30 to 45 minutes is probably about the average, depending on the call and the criticality of the call. Fortunate to have a trauma center within our city now. So our efficiency of getting the crews back in service pretty quickly is a lot better than it was when we were going to St. Joe's or downtown to the trauma centers. And just for council's information, that it's called unit hour utilization, UHU. It's used a lot with ambulance services. It's called time on task. So how long does it take them to do a task? The one concern that people have with UHU, what it doesn't tell the entire story is what makes up the rest of their day. Training, whether they're working out, report writing, inspections, station visits, all that stuff.
How long are they?
Because I know council's heard some other terms. I just wanted to make sure that was front and center. But a good thing about using that is accreditation will call for that. So as we start to move towards accreditation, that is one of the requirements for accreditation is that you are documenting unit hour utilization. Currently, we do not. That's not something that we can track with our current software. So as we move towards accreditation, that will be something that we'll start to learn. And that's what we've learned from our partners in the automatic gate system is those that are accredited are using that as a benchmark. So, but again, it tells just part of the story. So you use all the other data sets to help make up the whole story.
Okay. In your presentation, so south of Ray, you had said that half the calls are taking more than 8 minutes.
Correct.
And my understanding is that that's critical to life saving.
Absolutely.
And that's critical to brain damage, any chance of, having something be fixable.
Correct.
You've hit that threshold. And so, it really does concern me when I see this 8 minute. And back to Joe's discussion of, let's nail down those triggers and thresholds.
Right.
Because that needs to be the most important first. And obviously, health and life saving is number one next to structure. I mean, in my mind, that's the priority. And so I do get concerned really over that 8 minute time. And really, I mean, if that one's not met, to me, that's the most critical. I don't care that it's, we're 5 miles away, but
Right.
we want to be 6. I mean, that minutes, those to me are the most critical. I think that some of the areas that we're looking at, and I believe Joe also stated this, is that we're going to be at that 500 calls
Quickly.
far before the CIP states it.
Yep.
You've got the CIP at 2022 and 2023, and I'm visualizing 2017 and 2018 on some of these areas. And so I think that, we need to figure this out. And I understand the study question, and I think that since it was in 2008, things have changed, and we need to reassess it. But I think that in that reassessment, we need to look at the triggers and thresholds first.
Yes.
We need to look at, where we are currently and where we're going to be in the future. And I mean, I would love to see a map that showed, here's Station 182, and here's 4.5 miles around it, and I can't see that one.
Yeah. Sorry.
Is you have, okay, well, but those are, here's each station, here's 4.5 miles around each station, and what's the population in those areas, what's outside that population. Some other things that I would also like to see is, I know that you mentioned in south of Ray Road, back to the 58% of calls, but then you also had that Buckeye had done 24 service calls. Well, you know what? Was it 24 only because they are so bombarded with their own that that's all they could hit us with was 24? I mean, I don't know what their calls of service are.
Yeah. Yeah, we
just
didn't look at
curious.
their entire volume, but we know that that is a busier station for them. So that was either because 182 was busy or just where the location of the call was is how the GPS picks them up being available for the call. So,
Right.
and I guess if I can just point to the map real quick, because you did bring that up.
One, are you?
So
The mic with you?
I was gonna say I'm probably breaking all the rules of work session. Excuse me, Councilmember Holman. So, sorry, Larry. This map is of the 182 service area in the Estrella, and the dark green is the 4 minutes response time. The light green is 6, and then the pink is the 8-minute response time. So that's kind of similar to what you were asking for, except it's not by miles;
Right.
it's by
But by
minutes. So
time.
response analysis,
Yeah,
and then
which
we
is more important. So
and then we also have the we also have the 184 response time.
No, we need someone up here helping him. Come on. Somebody in
And
staff,
again,
come on up here and help a little bit.
green is the 4, light green is the 6, and then the pink is the 8. So that's for 184. And these are just 2 examples. Obviously, we wanted to show the growth areas that we have tonight on the presentation. But again, kind of similar to what you were asking for, Councilmember Osborne, is
that's
we could do it by miles
Yes, it does.
as
It
well.
does.
But this is kind of the response analysis that we do by time.
I think we wanted
And
to
so
know how
we
many
probably,
people.
do we have
Yeah,
a-
and the population as well
we
within
do,
those.
right here.
Under here.
Now, while you're doing this is sitting on our desk.
Yes, Mayor and
Well,
council
I've always
members.
wanted to be Vanna White, so
Yeah.
my,
You just wanted to have to
184
walk around with
Um,
those maps.
Yes, and you have it for each of the stations.
None of us noticed.
so a population would be nice in those areas too. What's
Right,
you know
and then 182.
how many rooftops are there?
How about plotting calls?
So when you do these, you need to tell us where they're located.
Okay.
and then Councilmember Campbell just asked, just to make sure that everybody knows, that 184 is at Saraville and Yuma, and Fire Station 182 is in a Estrella Mountain Ranch area at Spring and Estrella Parkway.
Okay. For the most part, which station is serving Litchfield Park the most?
183,
183.
yeah, and then
That's the community park one, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, at Litchfield and Avalon. And then Fire Station 174 in Avondale at their Surrey Mountain Community College on Dysart. They also are picking up some of the call volume in Litchfield Park as well.
Okay, I'm getting close. All right, so I agree wholeheartedly with Vice Mayor about police, and I know that obviously fire costs us the most money up front, and I hate to say it that way, but it's the capital, and I get it. I
understand.
totally understand that, and that's why we have to really think far in advance about how this is all planned out. I understand that, but it's critical to our areas that we have that police coverage. And so I know that gets more tricky as to thresholds and triggers and things like that, but it needs to be part of the conversation together. I can't stress that enough. And back to times where can you have a substation where it's, police, and maybe it's, if we start thinking outside the box, is it police and is it EMS together that can service something that is far more intense in that way than it is having, a full apparatus fire truck station, just thinking outside the box. Again, of course, with our development partners, making sure everybody's on board together about that. And I'm just curious, especially far south, how much is the county out there? Has there ever been a consideration of a city county facility. If they have, some of these county islands, because I don't know the land disbursement out there of who's who, whether it's Buckeye and straight to us or not. But could there be could it even be Goodyear Buckeye, community facility? I mean, it's just a consideration of thinking outside of how are we going to cover some of this stuff,
Yeah, certainly. I think that's something that we could look at. I'm not well versed in the county breakup of land south of Railroad, but certainly something that we could look at as part of that study.
Okay. Now, back to your fire station costs. This killed me after building my own building. What kind of square footage are you talking about for this fire station?
They're between 12,000 square feet and 14,000 square feet, roughly. Don't hold me to that quote. But
okay.
Roughly.
Because I really didn't know, and I'm like, what are you building here? So
Yeah.
I had to ask that question.
And if I may, I'm sorry for the interruption, Councilmember Osborne. And Paul, Chief Louisi, the stations being built now could accommodate up to 2 crews. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Is that part
yeah,
of the
absolutely. Yeah, we build those for the future in mind.
Okay. And the square footage for these, I understand you can't use impact fees for the temporary stations, but how large are those usually? Is it just for
It's typically a double, triple wide trailer that we put together for them.
Mobile.
Yeah, like similar to Mobile.
And the on West Goodyear,
Yes.
you showed this last year 386 calls, but that did not include the prison, or
Right, because the prison sits north of I-10, and currently Fire Station 321 from Buckeye Valley picks those calls up. Certainly, yeah, if we put a station, a hard station there, or any type of station there, GPS could pick them up as the closest now and kind of cancel out 321 on those calls. So there's a potential for that truck to pick up 163 more calls a year.
Okay, so, I think that was a majority of it. I mean, obviously, we're not finished this evening by any means, so we've got a long way to
Have
go.
another opportunity.
Oh, yes, but I do want to stress, I am concerned about that 8 minutes. I think that we need to be, and some of this stuff is City Gate's never been referenced in here, and I thought there was some important information out of there, and also just national standards. I know that there was a reference to ICMA study type of thing, but, back to what national standards are and what our City Gate expressed. Some of those things were not in here, and so, I do get concerned over some of the things that we're saying may be more feasible, but in reality, what's really best practices, and maybe that is a 4.5 mile range, and maybe that is a 6-minute response time, certainly not 8, but, things that we can handle. So I do look forward to you coming back with those important items. And I will stand behind a study. I think it needs to be done again. I hope you can do it for $3,500, but that's. I know you're shaking your head at me. I can ask.
Are you finished?
Yes. Thank you for the patience.
Carolyn?
Just looking at these maps briefly, it looks
Yes.
like there are some overlap.
Well, there's always going to be overlap, especially north of the Gila River, north of MC 85, where our stations are currently placed. Yeah, there is definitely some overlap.
Is there a master map that shows all of Goodyear, and it wouldn't be to this detail that we could read, but that we could kind of see that?
We tried to get that together. The GIS folks and Lisa Nagel really worked hard to get all these maps produced. So kudos to them for getting it done. It wouldn't fit on a slide, certainly, but it would be hard to discern because it would have to be at a pretty high level. Certainly, if that's what you guys...
I just think it would be kind of helpful to give a perspective of where these...
Okay.
Just a question, but I kind of wanted to weigh in on the study. I am definitely seldom in favor of studies because a lot of them just get put on the shelf and they're never used, and it's very frustrating, and you feel you've tossed your money, you've flushed it. However, in this case, I think we've been shown with the dramatic change that we're seeing and how many of the developments that we're seeing coming back to us, that there is definitely a change in what's being produced as far as homes, residential homes, and that given that it would make sense that those plans may not be valid today either when we're looking at fire and police for that matter. So in this case, I'm leaning towards study just because it's been such a dramatic change, and we need to be dealing with what we're looking toward in the future, not what we thought we were going to be looking for. So that I just wanted to kind of go on record.
All right, Bill, I'm going to give you the opportunity now to speak.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate it. I was told that an email that I sent on Friday was distributed to everybody. Did that happen?
Brian,
Mayor,
would you
council
address that?
members, yes, council member Stipp, that was given to them just at the start of this session.
Okay, so I'm not going to obviously go through every point in there because a number of those have been discussed, and I think some of the information from the Sonoran Valley Public Safety Master Plan, I've identified. So I just strongly encourage everyone to read it because it's a slightly different take. But regarding the study, what is it that we hope to accomplish with that study?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Stipp, one of my goals for this would be to establish the proper location for stations, to establish the proper response and trigger thresholds for construction of new stations, and really what we should be using now as our current response time goals, benchmarks, and baselines as we start to move forward and kind of see the city in a light of the way it's being constructed now. And, I think certainly to take in some of council members' recommendations as well, number of times that the apparatus is on one call and a second call comes in, trying to really call out all of that data and try to establish a best practice for our city.
Okay, so from the plans that were done in the late 90s and early 2000s, that we had pre-established fire station locations throughout the city based on existing development. In 2008, when the master plan was done, those station locations were reaffirmed by that study, correct?
That's correct.
So if we've already identified twice now what the locations are based on the projected growth, I have a difficult time seeing what a third study is going to tell us that we don't already know regarding the location of the stations. It seems to me that the real thing that's in question here is the triggers and thresholds and the costs of the fire stations. Those two things to me seem to be the bigger pieces. Did I miss something because I'm on the phone?
No.
Was that no? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, you didn't miss anything. I think that's an accurate summation. But I think too, just my one concern is in 2008, we were a different city, and the growth pattern at that time was more explosive, certainly than it is now. Is more steady, I guess, at this point rather than explosive. So, is it valuable kind of looking at current station locations and are they in the right spots? In our future plans growth, are we currently going in the right areas? Is the station that's supposed to be in West Goodyear, does it deserve to be at Harrison and Citrus, or should it be someplace else? I guess that's the questions that I would like answered if possible.
I think oftentimes it's difficult because we're talking about vast empty plots of land that have plans overlaid on them, but we haven't, nothing's been built. And I think that's probably our biggest frustration, because we can look at, and I think a great example of this is the King Ranch subdivision. It's already been platted. There's a number of, but it's vacant land, and it appears that it will be vacant for a little while. But we know that as that develops, there's going to need to be a fire station at, the corner of X and Y, and then there'll be another one at the corner of A and B, and another one at, L and M. We can anticipate that, pretty easily internally. And when you go into a community to try to determine, you're basically just counting rooftops and say, well, this has got 1,000 and this is going to be the road pattern, and you lay over a GIS map, and that identifies where your stations are at. I'm only afraid of redoing this study to just confirm what we've already confirmed twice. I'm in absolute agreement with the Vice Mayor and Joanne that this has to be we have to talk about police beats. That is one thing that has been absolutely absent from this conversation, but I think intuitively we know that our police chief and our fire chief could want to say we need more, because we have allowed growth to occur in the pattern that we have, and to try to serve the community. So my concern is this report that we're now going to pay for, and I'm going to tell you right now, it's going to be about and if we do police, it'll probably be $65,000 to pay to have this report done, and it comes back and tells us that we're very short. What are we going to do then? Not that we don't want to ask the question because we're afraid of what the answer is, but we have to be prepared that intuitively we all know that we're short. And we all see the financial picture, particularly as it's laid out in the CIP, that we're not even talking about having development money until the early 20s. Well, those could be 5 years too late. So when this study comes back, are we not at a disadvantage from a development perspective, but B, from a you knew it and still didn't do anything about it situation? I don't know what we're going to get from that, if we wouldn't be better off spending that 65 and moving it towards something else. I don't know, and I don't even know that there's a question in that. I think that's more of a statement. The only other question that I did have that came out of this is the numbers that we're using for the stations at $4.6 million seem kind of high, and I don't believe that. You talked about square footage for stations being between 12 and 14,000, but I believe Station 185 is about 10,000 square feet. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I was just making sure that if we were talking about South Array Road, that we would want a battalion in that station eventually, and so we would need some additional space to make sure that that's incorporated in there.
So we could build the 4.6 million station there to accommodate the third apparatus and the third set, but we don't need to staff that right away. The battalion can come years later, correct?
Sure. And we talked about maybe even more of a progressive approach to it, is add them, over time, maybe at 40 hours and then eventually on to a full shift.
Well, and I guess I would look at that and say, does the call volume out there does it even warrant it? Because what we're really talking about is managing managers,
right,
at that point. So, but I think there's ways to approach it. And the other thing that I have not heard is, the Sonoran Valley Master Plan suggested this 2-person pioneer company, and we're trying to apply that 187 approach, which is truly a pioneer location, into a more urban setting. And when we do that, that has an effect on our automatic aid agreement, which now, instead of just sending a 2-person company to stop the clock, we also send a 4-person company from somewhere else to pick up the slack, because that's what automatic aid does. And we're not talking about that end of the equation either. And I think the rest of the council needs to be aware that just because we say we put 2 people there and we stop the clock, that doesn't solve any of our problems. It only makes it worse, because we're dragging 4 people in from another station anyway. Correct?
Correct.
So if we think that 2 people is going to solve the problem, A, it's not, and B, the number of studies, and I mentioned this at the last work session, and again, you talked about the latest NIST study that was done. The studies that are being done year after year after year for the last 30 years have all said that even for an EMS call, a 4-person company is the most effective for the survivability of a critical patient. So if we're going to talk about 2-person companies, then if we're going to do a study, boy, we better be looking at getting a fleet of pickup trucks, and because that's going to solve all of our problems. And we all know, I think those in the profession know that that's not the solution. So I don't think I've got any other questions. Just kind of overarching. When the study indicates that there's more than more than the 2 we're looking at right now, what are we going to do? And then the other request that I have for my fellow council members is to look at the email that I put together regarding the triggers and thresholds, because that's everything that we're basing all of our decisions on going forward. And as we take another year to study this, where are we going to be? And in that time, how many plats are we going to approve, and how many PADs are we going to approve, et cetera, et cetera. That's all I got.
All right. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks.
Bill?
Just a couple things for clarification, just to make sure. The $1.5 million that we're talking about for the the census, it's a one-time shot in the arm. We're not going to get 1.5 new every year on top of the 1.5. Is that correct?
No, but it's an ongoing revenue source.
Correct.
For the next 5 years. But yeah, it's not 1.5 the first year, 3 the second. It's
I just want to make sure everybody knows that 1.5 just increases your base. So it's not like we're going to get another 1.5 each. I just want to make sure everybody understands that it's not come close to operating a fire station at 1.5. The second thing is, I think Councilmember Stipp hit my other question, is when we were talking about the 2, it's always been my understanding, if you're doing mainly health saving, 2 really doesn't cut it.
Correct.
So you really need to be talking about 4.
Right.
Okay. And I think Councilmember Stipp hit that, because that was my follow-up question, is I don't even know why we would even consider 2 it's such a location, because it's really not going to help anything.
We just wanted to make sure that you were well informed and saw everything that we were seeing.
Okay. Second piece. This is a great map, but what I think would be helpful in the pickup on, what Councilmember Osborne was mentioning about the critical on time. If we could plot calls within these maps that are the life-threatening ones in nature, which means they need that time critical sensitive, so we can see how many of them are falling outside the 4-minute, 5-minute, 6-minute. Maybe we don't want to, but the point is that kind of brings the urgency to what Councilmember Osborne and others have been saying of the importance of time is of the essence when we talk about this. Now, being a numbers guy, I will also say that we got to figure out a way to get ahead of this, because as I had mentioned to you earlier, or you had mentioned to us earlier about, we're maybe, a year and a half away on the western part, just meeting on the number of calls.
Yeah.
And it's going to be probably more and more challenging up the hill when we get south of Ray Road as a result of the redundancy with one outfit or one station not going to be in. So you've got nothing down there. And if you've got a critical nature and it takes them 10 minutes to get there, we all know what the result of that's going to be.
Correct.
So, again, I think it's real important to figure out a plan from a finance standpoint of how all this comes together.
If I could address that a little bit, we showed you tonight the capital improvement plan to show you what's adopted. Very important that you give the direction on the triggers and so forth. There are ways we can finance it and pay it back from impact fees. Excuse me. I get choked up when I talk about money here.
I noticed that.
No, we have, for example, about $17 million in geo bonding authority for fire stations that our voters have approved. You can use that as a means of getting fairly low interest rates to borrow the money. And then instead of levying a property tax to pay it back, you would actually use the impact fees to pay it back. So that would address the capital part of the cost. Doesn't address the ongoing part of the cost, but it does address the capital part. So, so I think it's less of financial modeling at this point and more of what is it that we need to provide the service, and then we can come back and address it.
And that's the point I was making, Larry. There's no doubt in my mind there's a lot of ways. I'm not so much concerned with the capital because there's a lot of ways of financing that. You just mentioned it, hit it on the hand. What I'm more concerned is the 2 million, 2.2, 1.8, whatever it happens to be, ongoing operation. If they all meet at the intersection at the same time, to me, that's the bigger challenge. You know, the capital, I'm sure you could come up with a plan to take care of that. But the operating is operating. That's ongoing money. That you can't create. So,
Sherry?
Oh, actually, you answered my question about the bonding. We have the bonding already approved for both the stations that we're talking about. It's just the operating, really, that we're kind of...
That's correct. And the impact fees that we're collecting can be used to pay the debt service if we were to do it ahead of that schedule. The schedule we showed you is when the cash will become available. You know, that's the difference, but it is the operating costs that always will be the biggest area of concern.
And trucks are not considered capital.
For that purpose, I think the fire truck is and
good.
can be
That helps
included
out a
in
lot.
there.
Okay.
Yeah, those are expensive. The Bat Chief vehicle probably is arguable. I'm going to guess not within there.
Okay. Well, that helps. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Molly?
Okay, I have a couple of questions. For each fire station that is proposed to be built, how many crews would we have to have for each station for it to be
You
operational?
mean total manpower?
Total manpower.
Typically, when we build a station and hire, we hire 14 for the station. So there'll be 4 persons per shift, so they give you the 12.
Okay.
But then we hire on 2 rovers to fill in for sick vacation.
It normally takes us about a year out to get these firefighters trained and ready to go.
Lisa and I like 18 months, just
18
from a
months,
standpoint of selecting through that process. The last time we had 5 candidates that we brought through, we sifted through roughly 800 applications for 5 positions. So it takes us a little bit of time. If you can imagine going after 14, it's going to be quite a larger pool that we have to sift through. So we figure about 18 months and then trying to get into an academy, et cetera.
Okay. Other than our temporary station at Mobile, where it's a 2-person crew, we have no other fire station with a 2-person crew.
No,
and
no.
we haven't been talking about setting up any station with just 2 people.
No, and
So-
as Councilmember Stipp alluded to, in the Sonoran Valley Public Safety Master Plan, such a long word.
They did in that, but
They
that's why I'm
did. They
saying
called it a
that's not
frontier
good plan.
station, but as he alluded to, it's more suited for that rural environment. You
Sure.
put it into a suburban environment, it doesn't work very well.
Right. And just because we have the 2 at Mobile, we do what we have to do, but we have to rely on mutual aid to provide
Automatic
the
aid.
truck.
Yeah.
Yeah, automatic aid. So we wouldn't necessarily be bringing a 4-man crew down there because we really don't have the calls for service for that.
Right. So just for instance, a cardiac arrest, the crew at 187 could stop that clock, initiate initial paramedic care, but they're relying on Maricopa to send a 4-person paramedic engine to come in to assist them on that call. So yes, it's
Okay.
you dump more resources in to a call like that.
Okay. What is your feeling about building a fire station and then just having it empty till? Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
Me too.
it's-
I hated to see Estrella Community College having that beautiful station empty for so long.
Right.
And the one in Surprise off of either Reams Road or something, there was one out there for years that was empty. And it almost makes me wonder why you would spend that amount of money and then have to wait 4, 5, 6 years before you could staff it, because by then whatever is in the fire station is either has to be redone or it's not like opening brand new fresh.
Correct. Right.
So I don't know that that's a good.
No.
I mean,
Joanne?
Yeah.
So, if a study is considered, and you're saying it could take about a year to do?
Well, I think we would work with the city manager's office, probably put it in for the budget that would start in July 1. We'd do the RFP, and then you figure at least six to 8 months probably after that would probably be a fast turnaround. So yeah, you're probably closing in on a year from
So
this
I'm
point
trying
in
to
time.
look at the timeline of the picture. You're saying that, let's say it's a year.
Okay.
And then we say, we discover everything we need to think we are going to find out. And then we go, okay, it's very apparent that we're going to need a station blank in Southern Goodyear. And then it's going to be another year to design it. It's going to be 18 months to staff it. And now we're back hitting 2019. And so in the meantime, we've hit other thresholds. We've hit other triggers.
Sure.
What's the plan? I mean, I understand in the long range here what we're trying to accomplish, but it's back to the question of what's going to happen during the meantime.
Yeah.
We got to be creative.
Correct.
And I'm not pushing for two-man crews. I mean, I hope that didn't come out of anything I said, but creativity is going to have to be thought about here, and
Right.
how we're
It's
going
going to
to
come with dollar bills.
Well, of course it is. Of
That's
course it is. We know that. It's
yeah.
not free.
No.
There is no free lunch. I'm sorry. There just really isn't. But, those are still going to have to be some questions that are going to need to be answered.
Sure.
And how we're going to, and I know that Councilmember Stipp still said to the group, going forward, in any kind of, building beyond the outer limits, shall we say, how are we looking at that? Because if it's still, those are just things we're going to have to keep in mind in how we address development. And anyway, I guess that's the only
Any other
thing I'd say.
questions? Yes, Joe.
No, just to follow up to what Councilman Elmore said, we need the Arizona Tourist and Sports Authority to give us our $5 million. So in 19,
There you go.
we have some O&M to pay for this.
There you
Yeah.
go.
So we need to work on our state legislators to take care of that deal, and we'll be sitting good.
That, or you need to go door to door and sell tickets.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're correct on that, but I also think we're going to have to really be looking at this budget very seriously this year, because it's called balance. And we have a lot of needs out there. Got a lot of people calling you, emailing you, things that they need and want. I think, of course, safety is paramount. I mean, it's hard to really put a figure on that, but we'd have to. So this is what's going to be difficult for us. A couple of things is, we've always talked about how we can partner with communities, and here, what a shame we didn't partner with Buckeye on a fire station that happens to be, So if there's anything out there with any of the other cities that we would be able to, if we could have some conversation with the other cities of where they're at, where's their next fire station is going to be, so that maybe we could work into something. I don't know. That could be far out, and it could be very difficult for us to be able to attain. But I think that's something we still need to be talking about, because that's really what we do, the automatic aid.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing, the automatic aid does sometimes prevent us from making the response time that we want to make. And you have to keep
Right.
that in mind. The trucks are out there, so some of these numbers on response isn't isn't because we haven't been doing the right thing. We haven't had enough fire stations. It's because of the circumstances. And I'm not against automatic A. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful balance of it all. So, so what I'm getting out of this conversation among all of you is that triggers are extremely important to you. You're not going with these triggers. You're not in compliance in your mind with these. Is that correct? I don't need a vote on this. I just need some nodding with your head. So we have to give staff something to look at. You've asked for a lot of really finite stats, and so I think we need to work through that on the maps and that they wanted. Some of the things I think is maybe more difficult and not necessary on some of them, but if we can come out with a balance of what's going to give them an information on something like this that they can just have in hand or on their iPads, fill in the information on these areas. Is that one of the things you all thought would be helpful to you?
It would be very helpful.
Okay, all right, just want you to speak up on that then. Let me see. Joe, and you're right about numbers, but numbers are really exact. Emergencies are not. Time is not. So that's the other difficult in really looking at this. You know, you can see the numbers, and they're not going to change. But it's going to change on what the emergency is and everything that's connected with it. So we have to remember that it isn't as simple as it sounds. And then you're going to have public criticism. And I can remember when the fire station opened at Pebble Creek, and there was nobody in it, right? Oh, did we get the calls?
Awful.
You know,
I'm sorry.
what's it there for? And how long was that before we actually?
Long time.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back. It wasn't too long after it was open that.
Enough time to cause a number of emails and questions on that. So I don't want us to get to that, to that point. And again, just manpower costs money, and lots of it. So this is a very, very difficult situation to make decisions on. So do you have enough information from what you heard today to Brian to come back? And is there any other questions you want to ask this council?
Mayor, members of the council, I'm sorry, looked like
I didn't see
Councilmember
him.
Pizzola had a
Joe, go
question.
ahead.
Just came to mind, are there any grants, operational grants at all out there to help communities such as ours to get money to help operate a fire station? Are there any of those out there?
No, I mean there are staffing grants called the SAFER grant, but I think they'll look at certainly at our budget and some other factors, and it would be be.
And the other thing I
challenging.
wanted for new construction, I want to put this out. We did do this when we have new communities. We notified the buyer via their contract on an addendum that what their response time was, and then we had a trigger of so many homes being built. Then that's when it had to take place. So you have to be careful that you're not going to kill development, because if you kill the development, there goes your entertainment, there goes your retail, there goes all the things that we've all asked for and want. So it's a really delicate balance here on how we end up with this. So I just want to put that out, okay? Joanne?
And Brian, because I don't remember what or Chief, you can tell me. I thought I just read something. I mean, we've been going over all this, but I just have to say thank you to you and all the women and men in our fire stations, because didn't you just get an award that I saw something?
Yeah.
And you know, thank you. I mean, that really says, and I know over the years that there have been awards and distinguishing things that we can be proud of that, you know, our fire guys have been doing, and I do appreciate that. So
Thank you.
I just want to bring that.
Yeah, and we also have to think about the safety of our police and fire. I mean, that's important to us too. Joe?
No, I realize our lifeblood is development and rooftops, but at the same token, I want to make sure that if we have residents that are on the outskirts of our service area, that they're aware that it may be a while to get there because of the funding. So I just want transparency if they're building on the outskirts as far as infill and going to the outer reaches of our city, that they're aware as a result of that. It may take a while to get the funding to get there. That's all. But I know development's important.
I don't disagree with you. I'm just saying that we will have to document that, and they will have to sign off on that, and they will be fully aware of what's going on, whatever solution we come up with. So, Bill, you're still out there. Do you have one more thing you'd like to say?
No, I'm just listening, so I appreciate the opportunity to call in tonight.
Okay, we appreciate that you did. Any other comments on this? Yes, Brian?
Yes, Mayor, members of the council, thank you for the summary. So there is enough interest right now in proceeding with the study, so we will be looking into that. That will include everything from fire station locations, validating do we have the land in the right spot, et cetera, as well as triggers, thresholds. Will be, and just a point on that, we'll have obviously the goals that will come out of this study, and we'll look at that as far as how that impacts future development of fire stations, how quickly, and potentially even how they're funded.
Well, I think, Brian, you have more questions this time that need to be answered for this study than we did the last time.
Yes, and also to include the police element as well. So we did hear that as far as looking at that part of the public safety service. We will continue to work with the development community. It's very important that they work with us as it relates to the potential for getting fire stations in or other public safety in sooner. And community paramedicine was mentioned as well. That's one where we are working on that grant. That's one that will, I think it may be able to impact part of this study as well. Not sure yet, but that's one where as we get into that, we'll really start to develop information as far as does that cut down on the 911 calls, et cetera. So that's a key part of this as well. This is very beneficial tonight. I appreciate all the comments, and it gives us the direction that we're looking for.
Great. Well, with that, I'm just going to ask the council, do you have anything you want to share tonight with the activities that have been going on this week? All right, we'll do it at the next meeting because we had a lot of really outstanding things happen. We'll pull it all in with the baseball, the beginning of that. So any information or a request to the city manager? All right. With that, then let me see. The next meeting will be a work session, a regular meeting on March 14th, 2016. That will be at 5 o'clock for the work session. So this meeting is adjourned.
And spring training tomorrow.
Yeah. Thank you.